Hey everyone, David Shapiro here with another podcast interview. Today I am super excited to introduce Anna Bernstein, one of the world's first professional prompt engineers. Anna is wonderful to talk to, very, very bright, and just a wonderful, charismatic person. And so without further ado, Anna, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, how you got to where you are, and what you're working on?
Yeah, I am a prompt engineer at Copy AI. Kind of a strange path to get there. But yeah, create the prompt infrastructure at Copy AI, and it's both a building role for things we need and a bit of a mad scientist role for things that might be possible, which is a lot of fun. And I grew up in New York, come from a very non-tech background until I started at this role. So like I said, it's been kind of a strange path to get here, but I love it. I love prompt engineering and I love where I am in the industry. So
Excellent. Thanks so much. Yeah, so during our original like pre-podcast talk, one of the things that you mentioned was that you always had a love of language. And I don't remember exactly how you articulated it, but that you really love to zoom in and get into the weeds of language. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your background and your love of language, because that really stood out to me.
yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to be a writer, and uh, I think I have sort of a slightly obsessive approach to language, which can be a good or a bad thing. Certainly not the best when you're trying to figure out the words to choose on a podcast. But I really like taking an analytical approach to language, but specifically to like creative language, creative writing, literary work. I think uh, it it can be really fruitful to like drill down on that. Um, and that's manifested in a couple ways before this job. The first was I don't know if you want me to go into this yet, sort of education stuff or
Yeah, please go for it. Yeah, we'll jump around just as it makes sense.
so I had a minor, was doing a minor in Arabic translation, specifically like Fusha translation, which is a lot of medieval poetry as well as the Quran and the Hadith. And I um, really loved how compact the grammar was. In a way, it wasn't flowery. It was extremely efficient and extremely elaborate at the same time. And a four-word sentence in Fusha could be like, an eight-word sentence or much longer in English. But it was a lot of puzzle solving in regards to language and a lot of like a single diacritic mark could like change the entire meaning of a sentence. So you really had to be extremely precise. And at the same time, the puzzles you were unlocking weren't dry. They were like these beautiful verses. And once you got it right, once you had all the like, oh, this is in the jussive or whatever, and you like unlocked the puzzle of that verse, you were rewarded with like, oh my God, that meaning is beautiful. So it was this like combination of like analytical like approach to it and like puzzle solving approach that like ultimately the puzzle you were solving was like a beautiful poetic meaning. And that I moved on from college thinking that would never be relevant ever to my career. um, but I kind of find that there's a parallel there to prompt engineering for sure.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful story. And my fiance is she loves Latin, and so she tells me all very similar stories about translating the Aeneid. And just it's fascinating because especially for monolinguists like myself, or monoglots probably is the right word. Like we're only familiar with English, so I have a bunch of different directions I want to go. But I guess first, well, Actually, let's rewind, because this was a really great intro. So let's rewind a minute and tell us a little bit about how you landed this job. It started at a jazz club, right?
It's yeah, I love going out to a jazz club when it's raining and just having a single drink by myself, and it's a wonderful like ritual that I do maybe once a month. And I did that. Went to go check out a new place. And started talking to someone there who was Wen Yu Zhang, who's an early person at Copy AI. And we had this moment where it was like, oh, your brain does a really similar thing to what my brain is doing. Like we just sort of got along really well, and kept hanging out. And there was a moment where he was trying to figure out. This was like the second or third time we hung out. He was trying to figure out what the I'm now forgetting the name of it, but there's a word in there's an Indonesian word for a certain type of flavor. It's similar to umami, but it's specifically Indonesian. Now I don't remember what it is, and I would mispronounce it anyway. But basically, he was like, "Oh, I can't think of it. Hold on." And he pulled out his phone and started doing something. This was summer of 2021. Pulled out his phone and started doing something, and I was like, What is that?" And it was the playground for GPT-3 on his phone, and he had like typed in stuff of like describing the flavor and then like asking what it was. And he like explained to me what he was doing and what the playground was, GPT-3, and this is early, so this is like Da Vinci, just base Da Vinci. And I was immediately like, oh wait, I think maybe if we just wrote the first part of the sentence instead, rather than asking the question outright, it would just like autocomplete, or like, I don't know. I just like very arrogantly immediately had a billion ideas for how to do this thing that I barely understood. And we got the flavor name, and I was kind of hooked. And a little while after that, he was like, "Why don't you? We've tried a lot of people in this role. We're not even sure if this is a role." At the time, they were like, "Oh, you just sort of improve the examples in our K shots or whatever. It's more of a copywriting role." They thought, and like they had tried a number of people in that role, and it kind of wasn't working. So they were really taking a shot in the dark with someone when you met at a jazz club. And I remember Chris Liu, who's one of the co-founders of Copy AI, when he was explaining it to me, I loved the way he explained it. He was like, "It's kind of like a spell. Like, in Harry Potter when they say a spell slightly wrong and it like does the slightly wrong thing, but they have to like get the flick of the wrist right, and like you just have to like get the spell right, but you don't know what you're inventing the spell." And I was like, that I can do that. So yeah, started there on contract freelance, and then when they saw I was adding value, they hired me. So yeah.
Wonderful. That is such a great story. That's like a perfect origin story. Um, so yeah, so you mentioned that you work on the prompt infrastructure for Copy AI, and obviously we want to respect any proprietary information.
Mhm.
But since you've been there, and you work on language, and you've had this really analytical view, and it sounds like you almost kind of had an intuitive kind of take to it. So I have a couple directions that I want to go. Is one, could you describe how your background, your study of Arabic, or anything that you might have done before then, because I believe you mentioned that you were a research assistant before that as well. But then how does all that tie into prompt engineering? And obviously, like, if they hired you full time, it has worked out well. So what about you, your experience, your interests, has made you ideal for this role? I know I asked a bunch of questions, so just I'll
Mhm.
leave it up to you. Pick whichever direction you want to go first.
Yeah, well, I think it's similar to what I was saying about the sort of like analytical approach to what makes language beautiful or what makes language compelling, thinking about the like specifics of when you look at the language itself, but also like the audience's interaction with the language that makes it compelling. But I can't say it was necessarily all of my. I mean, I had a wonderful education in New York, and then had a great 2 years of education at McAllister in Minnesota, and then dropped out because of health issues. I couldn't get to class every day. Went back to New York and worked partly as a copywriter, but as you mentioned, partly as a like research assistant, mainly for like historical and biographical projects. I worked on a book called Women Who Made New York with Julie Scelfo, where I got to research a lot of different women, and that was really wonderful and fascinating, digging up like the exact right fact about someone that sort of unlocked their whole narrative. Which I guess as I say that, that sort of fits with this theme that I'm realizing of like this sort of like slight obsessiveness and like finding just the right thing for like a narrative or creative purpose. I also write poetry, which the other day I was at a party and my friend was like, "Here is poetess Anna Bernstein," and I was like, "Never introduce me that way again." But I have some poetry in journals, and a couple short stories. But writing poetry is for me, it's obsessive process, but it's also one that involves seeing many different approaches at the same time and keeping them in mind, and often like mentally not throwing them away in case you go down one route and it doesn't work and then you have to back up and go down a different route. And often it's also a process of choosing when to go with your first thought and when to go with your like 246th thought. It's rarely like your fifth thought, I find personally, but I think like that sort of thinking of like what's the most intuitive thing to do here, balanced with like what's an unintuitive thing to do here that I haven't maybe thought of yet that would be a better way of approaching this. I think is helpful, along with obviously the editing process of poetry is so like granular, and like you have to, and even short stories, like there's this tip of like if you find yourself taking in and or taking out and putting in the same comma over and over again, your story's probably done. Otherwise, it's probably not. So it's yeah, it kind of all ties together in a way, especially because when you're writing, you're trying to write for yourself, but also write for your audience, and you're trying to think of how your writing interacts with another brain, or a potential other brain, or potentially many other brains. But you're also trying not to think about that as much. But you have to be thinking about that. And with prompt engineering, there's this balance of treating the AI as human in a weird way, where you're like, how would a human do this? What parts of the human thought process am I missing when I analyze this task? Like what is missing from this task in the sort of undercurrent of it that isn't being provided to the AI? And sometimes that's better with like treating it as more human, but then there are also ways where you're like, I am treating it as too human and I need to like back up and think of like the specific limitations and the specific powers that it has and that each different model has. So that was very rambling. I'm sorry.
Well, I have good news. I was able to follow it, but I think that there's, I mean, gosh, there's so much that I agree with you on, because I've been slightly obsessed myself with language models, and so yeah, you mentioned a few things a couple times that I want to unpack a little bit. So one was audience. So you've mentioned audience a couple times, like thinking about the language model as your potential audience. Maybe it helps to think about it as human or not, depending on. So there's that aspect. But you've also talked about how you tend to think through like the undercurrents of what is and is not present in the language that you're feeding the model or the prompt engineering. But one thing that really stood out to me, the thing that most stood out to me as you were sharing that, was the process of writing poetry. And you said that, sometimes there's the intuitive path, there's the unintuitive path. Sometimes you pay attention to the first thing, and sometimes it's the 200th thing. And that sounds kind of like prompt engineering in some respects. And so what I wanted to do was explore this idea that creative writing, or poetry in particular, which is a very specific use of language, how your mental approaches to this, how that might have played into your abilities as a prompt engineer, what your observations are, and then finally, editing, if that kind of figures into it as a skill. I want to think about these things as skills that have been developed, or intuitions that have been developed. So what are your associations there with poetry and audience?
Yeah, I think choosing the exact right word is, in order to elicit the right reaction, is extremely important. I actually don't even know which one I'm talking about when I say that, because I mean it for both. And elicit the right reaction, although means very different things for both those things. And one, it's, you're almost trying to, by finding the exact right word in the prompt, like almost task locate for the right reaction from the AI. And I think people underutilize word choice in their prompts. They sort of rely on approach, which it's good to take a variety of approaches. That's also very good. But sometimes I find that an approach I want to take doesn't work on the first try, or like the 10th try with the wording I'm trying. Like sometimes it is really helpful. Like you can make this crazy approach that you thought just, wasn't viable work when you like really hit the right like vocabulary for it. Like there's a specific, I won't go into too much detail, but there was this specific approach that way that I was like, oh, it doesn't work. And like no matter the synonyms I try to, and then I hit on this phrase, thoroughly and faithfully, and that like unlocked the whole thing. And the same thing can happen with poetry. I mean, instead of the right generation happening, what you're looking for is that like kick in the chest when you read it, which is a bit more ephemeral and whatever. But for me, it does feel in some ways like a binary when I read poetry. Like either that happens for me or it doesn't. So yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to language as act, and language as speech act, and that kind of thing. And this is like a very like prompt engineering is a very literal, like concrete example of like language as like a speech act, like a piece of speech that by being spoken enacts something. So I think they both belong to that category. That's maybe a little more like, I don't know, maybe you're looking for something a little more practical. I think word choice, and I think in poetry, something that's also underutilized is variety of approach. When it comes to like, I know I need to use that more when something's not working. I've gone down a pathway for a while to like go back and like think about the whole like approach of the poem rather than like line by line necessarily, or the wording of lines. And that does happen with prompt engineering as well, where you realize you have over-engineered something and the approach just isn't working, and you need to like take a step back from it. So there's a lot of parallels there.
Absolutely. One of the cardinal rules that I have learned is more often than not, less is more. Sometimes if you're really struggling with a prompt, it's just like, just simplify it and see what happens. So another phrase that you've used kind of differently when you were describing like working through or getting the right effect from creative writing, and you use this word again, or these pair of words for getting the prompt, getting the machine to do what you wanted it to do, is locking versus unlocking, trying to unlock whether it's a particular response from a person, from a reader, or trying to get that feeling for yourself, or then of course getting the performance from the machine. So that's a very particular choice of words, and it resonates with me. But I wanted to ask you, what do you mean when you use that I don't know if it's an analogy, but the adjectives of locked versus unlocked? Like it's almost like you're trying to pull something out of the machine, right? just like you're trying to pull something out of a reader or yourself.
Yeah, yeah, it's similar to that. You know that the thing you're trying to say, the emotion is almost a strange word for it. It's a bit wrong, but let's say the emotion you're trying to get at is somewhere within yourself also. I mean, you're your primary reader as you're writing poetry, so you're trying to like create that feeling for yourself too. And you know it's somewhere in the big jumble of all the words that could ever exist, and you're trying to find the right ones um, in order to, yeah, unlock it, or it would be like find it. Um, and when you're working with the AI, you're working with sort of a toddler that knows everything. But also when you're writing poetry, you're like thinking about how you're writing for like everyone in the, not everyone in the world, but like you're not writing typically for one person, you're writing for like an audience of brains. So it's actually not that dissimilar in a weird way where you're like, this is, it doesn't have to like unlock or task locate or however you want to put it, that response in every single person, as long as it like task locates for it in the people for whom that emotion exists and or like that particular connection exists of experience or of enjoying your poetry or whatever. That sentence got the hell away from me. But yeah, it's the more I like think about the parallels, the more it does come back to like task location of emotion for poetry, um, which is kind of strange. I hadn't thought about it that way before.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, so you mentioned task locating a few times, and my fiance is a librarian by training, and so she's shared that term with me. But from your perspective, could you share with our audience what it is that you mean by task locating as it pertains to prompt engineering, with large language models, but also with human audiences? And you've talked a lot about audience and alluded to like theory of mind, like you model what's going on in the mind of either the machine or your audience of one, your audience of yourself, or audience of many brains. So talk to us a little bit about task locating. What is that?
Task locating is essentially tricking the AI. No, it's finding for if what you want it to generate typically exists within a specific context, it's recreating that context for it so that it is more likely to generate the thing you want. Um, like if you wanted to generate a name and for whatever reason you weren't just doing this in a simpler way, you could be like, paper, like paper title by, and then it would generate a name, even though you hadn't told it to generate a name. So that's like a very simple like example of task location. But the idea of it crops up in a lot of other ways. You can sort of like, a lot of it gets fuzzy with also sort of like priming the model in different ways. Um, and it also intersects, I think, with like, I'm not totally sure what the industry term is for this right now, but things tend to change around. But like irregular K shots, where the example is actually of a different task. But even with regular K, you are kind of task locating for like, here's this example, here's this example, here's this example. You're like trying to convince it that somewhere within it exists a list of the perfect examples that you need. So yeah, I guess there's like concrete task location of like things that actually exist in its corpus. And then there's a bit of deceptive task location for like things that you're trying to tell it exist in its corpus. But a common way to sort of task locate a prime is through like author voice. You see it all I mean, it's in it's like, you are Dan, you are even like people telling it like you are a sentient AI that's really good at stuff, like helps. And it's that's a form of task location, in my opinion, the author voice thing.
Yeah, I in one of my books I called that agent model. So like you tell it like this is what you are and this is what you're capable of, and it's able to just kind of step into those shoes and say, oh, this is what I am. And And like you said, how did you say? You said like kind of tricking the AI or kind of getting it to confabulate into this latent space that it's got. That's wonderful. I'm glad to know that another human thinks about this the way that I do. It's very reassuring because I've tried to explain some of this to folks, and some people don't get it, because one thing that I have found is that computer science people sometimes think of it as a machine learning model first, but you and I, we seem to think of it as a language instrument first. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you agree with that? Do you think of this as primarily, what did you call it earlier? A speech act, right? Like you don't. Do you think of it as a machine, or do you think of it otherwise?
I definitely still think of it as a machine. It's there have been concepts over the past however long it's been, year and a half, however long, where I've learned more about the sort of like not even broad concepts of machine learning, because a lot of them are specific, but sort of from a non-technical, like this lever does this, it works this way, and like that helps, I find, a lot in explaining a lot of its behavior. But then there are also things I end up explaining to the people who make the where it's like, well, it acts this way, and I think it's because of this, or like, have you noticed this behavior? Where it is like inevitably getting away from them a little bit. Like you can't predict all of its behavior via the technical side of machine learning. That's almost the point of it. So it is like, I mean, it's a sign that the technical side of it has been very successful, that we are now like thinking of it in a non-technical way.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Especially kind of the way that you just articulated that at the end, like it is a sign of success that it's kind of gotten away from strictly the engineering side or the scientific or technical side, by virtue of the fact that it is working, because it is not expressly like maybe deterministic or fully mechanistic. So what I wanted to explore a little bit more on this line of reasoning or thinking was, how does, so you said that you do think of it kind of as a machine, and you try and observe its behaviors and establish reasons for the behaviors, or at least explanations, a model for the behavior.
Mhm.
But how does language overlay or intersect with that? Because at the beginning of the conversation you mentioned all kinds of aspects of language, Arabic language, with diacritics and grammar and everything. So based on your use of large language models, how much do aspects of language, such as you mentioned, vocabulary, word choice, different approaches, but what about grammar and syntax and other aspects of language? How do you perceive those as having been woven into the machine, so to speak?
Not totally sure I understand the question. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I probably didn't ask that well. Okay, so asking it another way, here, let's do some human prompt engineering. So the prompt that I just gave you didn't work. So let me try a different prompt. So word choice is very important for prompt engineering, right?
Mhm.
How important is grammar or
Oh,
syntax?
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, the way you choose to phrase something, the style of syntax you use can also like can indicate a level of sophistication of writing versus the simplicity of writing. And maybe you want that simplicity of writing. You want direct, uh, you know, simple cause and effect informational writing for your readers, or maybe you want it to be a bit more human sounding or literary, and that the style of, I find, like rhythm, um, especially with example following models, the style of the rhythm of the sentence, and having a classic sort of writing rule, having like a variety of rhythms in your sentences, variety of number of clauses in your sentences tends to make its writing, I find, more sophisticated. There are also, things like creating links when you want it to do a task, like creating links um, via the verbs you use, where you can use causative verbs rather than linking things with like just like being like you have a bunch of briefs and a bunch of these things, or like a bunch of briefs and a bunch of pieces of content. You can actually link those causatively rather than just kind of putting them near each other in the sentence. There's also like this isn't quite great, but when it comes to word choice, there's like approaches where sometimes referring to something in different places with synonyms, if you can refer to it multiple times throughout the prompt, like referring to it with synonyms each time can help the model sort of triangulate on what it is. But if you're using that section as sort of a tool for another section, you want it to refer back to that section, you really need parity between what you call it, what you label it, and what you call it in the sentence. You can't like approximate it the way you would with a human being necessarily, or it won't work as well. So this is like structurally, there's a lot of stuff. There's also the whole like approach, I'm sure, that of like you can put things in the future tense, the present tense, the past tense. You can say you've already written this, explain to me how you did it. You can do a lot of weird stuff with just with tense especially. I find that can really switch up abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially by making those positive assertions, it just kind of rolls with it and says, okay, sure, like you told me this thing is true, so I'll just assume that that's true. Or at least that seems to be how it interprets that. One thing that you said earlier that I wanted to unpack before we take a brief break and then come back to change gears was you said that that this kind of AI is like a toddler that knows everything, and I thought that that was very illustrative. But I like that, and I was wondering if you could unpack how you came to that understanding of large language models.
I mean, it's a little trite. It's not like totally true, but it's like, it's close enough. It's how I describe it at parties when I'm trying to describe my job. But yeah, it's I mean, it has a huge wealth of knowledge and also often not a lot of common sense, although obviously that's getting better all the time. Um, but it doesn't, have common sense the way a human being has common sense, where when we're in an interaction with another person, we are thinking there's like a tent we put over. This is going to be confusing phonetically. There's a tent we put over the interaction, I feel like, of like the other person's intent, what they want out of the conversation, like especially if we're like trying to do something for them. Obviously it's like, what is the goal? And it doesn't always, sometimes it doesn't have the tent over what it's doing, and sometimes it puts the tent up over here, or like it's upside down, or like whatever. It's not always as good at that as a human being is. Where you're like, you kind of did this, you did what you thought you were doing well, but a human being would understand that that's not. And that's what I like when I'm editing other people's prompts. So much of what I'm doing is going back into the prompt and going, this, you didn't even say like what you thought, like what, like you're telling me out loud what you want, and that's not what you told the AI. You told it to do something totally different, and it's like, or something like a little bit off, and it's taking you very literally in doing that thing rather than doing what a human would do and like understanding the overall task. And that reminds me of being a child. I didn't know what was going on. I definitely remember, I probably still have moments like that, but that definitely reminds me of you know, being, yeah, literally being a toddler and like not understanding often dynamics of situations I was in. Except I didn't
Yeah,
have like
getting a little.
all the details of the War of 1812 or whatever in my brain.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great way to elucidate that. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. Obviously, for the audience, it'll be instantaneous, but we'll be right back, and we'll change focus on to a little bit other aspects of language and language models and where AI is going. So we'll be back in just a moment. Hey, everybody, and we're back from our short break. Wanted to change gears for the last section of this episode. As the audience may or may not know, one of the key things that I want to do with this podcast is to demystify AI for 2023 and for the world, because things are changing so incredibly quickly. And that's why I'm having these interviews with people who are at the cutting edge, or who have past experience to draw from in order to help provide guidance and kind of shine some light on the situation for the rest of us. So, Anna, I wanted to ask you, where do you see AI going? Particularly, how are things going to change in 2023? What are your thoughts on kind of the state of things and where it's going in the immediate future?
Pretty difficult question to answer. I think as we see the writing quality itself of current LLMs improve and get more human, there will probably be kind of a parallel debate about like people right now. The debate for writing is like, will students generate essays with the AI? And I think as the writing quality gets better and better, it'll move into, will people win writing competitions using bits and pieces, maybe not hold it, but like from the AI. It's parallel to the debate that's going on with like visual art, and AI visual art. And I hope that that'll sort of even itself out. People will realize that that's kind of like how 3D printing didn't kill sculpture. It's I hope people embrace it as a tool. I think maybe that won't happen in 2023, but I do think that'll happen. As just, rather than thinking of it as competition, thinking of it as like an augmentation, like another brain to think with, but not a replacement for your brain. I also think the nature of like search is going to change. The nature of like finding information is going to change as we get, things like Chat GPT, which are, reliable, and sort of more conversational, like returners of information, that in a way have like a better idea of like the tent that I was talking about earlier. Like, I don't know why I keep saying like the tent, and that's so close to the word intent, which is really just what I mean. But the like your overall intent, that like, I mean, Google has poured so much into intent of search. And when you make it conversational and make it an AI like ChatGPT, that it's able to do it really well. So I think that's going to change. I know I've already used it that way. I was bored with the deli sandwiches I was ordering, my usual roster. And whenever I searched a new type of deli sandwich, or like deli sandwich best deli whatever I tried to search, it was like, here's some great deli sandwiches to make at home. And I was like, that's not helpful. And it's not like, I need like for like a New York deli, like what's a good combination? And I used Chat GPT for it, and it gave me a slightly weird but pretty good sandwich. I don't remember what was in it, but it was pretty delicious. Anyway, so my point is, I think the nature of search is going to change, and I hope that the nature or how people think about like creative augmentation is going to change.
That's that's a phenomenal view, and I am right there with you in terms of, one, just hoping for people to embrace it and thinking of it as an augmentation, not a replacement, something that helps make our lives, better, easier, whatever. That's a great idea, using it for coming up with a better sandwich. I haven't used it for that yet. I have used it to help with my own writing and drafting and those sorts of tasks. So, you pointed out that like 3D printing didn't kill sculpture. hopefully things like Dolly and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion don't kill graphic art. I don't think it's going to. But certainly there is a lot of consternation over those boundaries right now. I think that's kind of probably the more diplomatic way of saying it. And certainly there's a lot of pain on both sides. There's AI artists who are relieved that they are finally able to express themselves with the help of these tools, and then there are other artists that are also kind of facing pain because they feel like something's being taken away from them, and certainly there's huge disruption. And I really empathize with people on both sides. I've had YouTube comments from people on both sides, just expressing like, yeah, this kind of sucks. So with that, I wanted to ask a little bit more. What are you worried about? You mentioned certainly like what was it? New York City banned ChatGPT in schools. So is there anything else that you're worried about? And then beyond that, what are you excited about for AI in the coming year?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what I'm worried is like when it comes to the writing side of it, I'm worried about, there's an educational element to like crafting an essay about a topic. You learn the topic much better. It sort of doesn't matter. The point of crafting the essay is not for the essay to get published somewhere and read by other people when you're in school. So when the function of it is that you become more educated by crafting the piece of writing painstakingly on your own, and students are replacing that with generating it with an AI, they're losing an educational element, and that's concerning to me, for sure. In terms of like the flip side of that, and like I think I'm excited to continue, or for like the creative side of language models to continue to develop. A huge part of my job at Copy AI is that we offer like a more creative generation than you might find from like ChatGPT or whatever, and more of a variety of approach. If you don't like the first generation, you can regenerate and get something different. That's like a big part of what we offer. And yeah, creativity of approach, variety of approach, creativity in human sounding language, even if it's maybe a little bit less precise. And I really just want to like keep exploring that, keep seeing that in other places. And I really want people, I mean, I touched on this before, but I really want the writing world to like embrace this as a really powerful tool. That's because the ultimate goal of your writing, you haven't come up with it any less in a way. Like you're still putting this writing in front of, if it's beautiful writing, it's beautiful writing. And the purpose of it is the response of the audience. And whether or not the beauty of it was like partly generated outside, the idea for it was partly generated using like a brain augmentation that you're controlling, or like your own brain, like you crafted it and it's beautiful and it's eliciting that response in readers, and it's eliciting that response in readers because of their human experience. So I don't think there's you know I'm debating whether I can share something that happened with an OpenAI model, but I don't think I can. Oh man, I'll come back to it at some point. Someday I'll share that story. But I'm really excited for that side of AI to kind of blossom.
Excellent. Yeah, and obviously, if there's something that you're not comfortable sharing, no big deal.
I think I'm just not to.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, so like as a creative myself, like I kind of split two worlds. I'm on the the research side and the creative side. I definitely feel you there on like let's embrace it. And while you were speaking, something occurred to me, like if as a novelist, if I take my novel to a critique group and I get ideas from a critique group, and then I take it to an editor, it's not a product of strictly my own brain.
Yeah.
Same with these tools. And I'm not saying that like, okay, an editor is equivalent to getting help from ChatGPT or even having a ghostwriter, right? Because it's
Right.
still a human. But one thing that you focused on was if it elicits the right response from the receiver of that art. Is that like, that's part of the goal? And we don't have to unpack that unless there's any points that you wanted to dive deeper in before we move on to kind of the last section of the podcast.
Yeah, I think just one thing quickly is that for something like visual art, there's a worry there about, I think, loss of craft, like art versus craft, and like, but the craft side of art where people aren't debating, or people are, but there's this kind of like, well, yeah, you came up with the idea for it and whatever, but like that's only part of it. Part of it is like the crafting of the object and the skill that goes into that and the artistic sensibility that goes into using that skill. And I can't comment on that because I'm not a visual artist, and I think but I do think that's a very fair debate to have when it comes to writing. That the divide between like craft and art is always more nebulous because there isn't like a craft aspect to it. Writing is very strange, as like sometimes when I'm like, even when I'm asked to read poetry at a poetry reading, sometimes it feels like I'm getting up on stage and being like, look how good I can walk, and then like walking back and forth because it's like something that most of us can do. And I'm like, I can do this even better. And like, I can do it in a way that means something. And I'm like just reading words off a page that I wrote. So that divide has always been a bit more nebulous. And I think that's part of what makes people nervous about this is there's like, but also why I think when it comes to augmenting creativity, when it comes to language, I actually think to me, there's less of a gray area there. I don't feel as like conflicted about it because, you know, it, you're not losing like craft. It's like just a new tool for something that already was like not quite literal craft anyway.
That makes sense. And it's not a perfect analogy, but the computer didn't destroy education. Even though it makes some things easier, some things are a little more convoluted. And yeah, I do hope that we can adapt to these tools and think of them as just more tools, extension of the art. So I wanted to the final few questions that I had for you. The first one is, what do you personally want to achieve? Like, you mentioned at the beginning of the episode that, or maybe it was just before we started, but you said like, you never would have thought that you'd be a prompt engineer. So how has AI changed your life and your direction in your career, and what do you want to personally achieve in the coming, year or two or three?
Well, I'd love to extend this career and keep doing this. Keep like I'd love to be, you know, one of many people, but like be on the forefront of like steering where these models are going and what they're capable of through prompt engineering and prompt optimization and prompt training and stuff. And I think some people see, like the ability of the AI is this and it's ramping up, and prompt engineering is like this, where like as we get closer to it, like, this like prompt engineering is needed less and less. And I see it a lot more like that. So I'm excited to see like if prompt engineering is capable of what it's capable of right now, what will it be capable of 10 years from now? And I really want to be part of that future. I'm not totally sure what that looks like from a career standpoint. I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could no more predict Dolly 2 and then Chat GPT than we could anything else. So who knows what's going to change within the next 12 months. Um, but yeah, like you, I also want to just stay part of it because whatever's going on, it's really cool and it also feels really important. Who do you want to get connected with? Is there anyone that you would like to reach out to you on LinkedIn or Twitter, or however you want to engage with the world? Is there anyone that you want to invite into your professional life or into your sphere?
Come on, come on. I don't know. No, I'm interested in connecting with, sort of in the same way that copy AI was like unsure whether this was a role that would add value. I'm interested in like thinking about what are other, industries where they don't realize this could add value. So if you're like unsure, I'd love to like discuss that with you. If you are one of the other few prompt engineers out there, a few of you we've connected on LinkedIn, but like I feel like it's, like we're there a handful of us, and I would love to get connected with anyone else who, whether that's your official title or not, if it's something you do professionally, I would love to talk to you. And then, also if you're someone who's interested in getting into it, especially if you come from a non-tech background, but you think it sounds like something that makes sense for you, you have a kind of like, I've said this word a bunch now at this point, but like an obsessiveness is kind of important, and like really loving language is important. Um, and more just like loving like semantics and like approach to this thing is important. So um, if you're interested in that, and if you're interested in AI from like a literary or like writing quality standpoint, I'd love to get in touch.
Wonderful, wonderful, excellent. And quick follow-up question: where is best for people to connect with you? On LinkedIn, Twitter?
Probably on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay.
If people are interested, I also have I uh I know I have a few friends who would like yell at me if I didn't share this. So I also have my website, which has my writing on it that's been published. It's poetry and short stories, so it's not totally relevant, but that's just my name.com, AnnaBernstein.com. But if you want to get in touch about prompt engineering, definitely my LinkedIn would be better.
Perfect, perfect. And I always like to wrap up these episodes by just asking my guests, what are the words of wisdom that you want to put out into the world? Just any final words. What is it that you would like the world to know or to hear or to think about?
Um, there's something formulating, but it's not quite coming. It's something about how like creativity, we don't have to forfeit the realm of creativity as like a particularly human realm just because we've created a new tool that helps us with it. I don't know if that made
That's
any
really
sense.
beautiful. Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. And so we'll leave it at that. We do not have to forfeit the realm of creativity just because we've created a tool. So thank you so much
Doesn't make us
for
less human. That's what I'd add. Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much for your time, Anna. And I of course wish you well. And as always, I really enjoyed having this time to speak with you. And thanks everyone for watching, and check back in and be good.